Okay. I'd like to call this regularly scheduled meeting of the Board of Finance for Monday, July 20th, 2020 to order. First item, before we go into the agenda, I am going to ask for a switch in the agenda, items number 4 and 5, so that the Board of Education will follow the town on the report. So do I hear a motion to make that switch?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Great, thank you. Okay, item number 1, public forum. I don't see any. We're the public tonight. Item number 2, approved minutes of the regular meeting of June 15th, 2020. Do I hear a motion to approve the regular meeting?
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Any comments, edits, discussion? Can't say I saw anything. Looked good to me. Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anybody, any opposed or any abstentions? I think everyone was here, right? So. Very good. Item number 3, correspondence, standing building committee.
I had a couple of points.
Mr. Gamerman, go ahead.
Yeah, first of all, on the options that are outlined on option 1, the issue here is, just to refresh everyone, the update on performance contracting. Apparently, we can realize a savings of about $88,000 if we take option 1. Are there any downsides to that?
I'm going to
Roof coating and all that.
turn over to our first selectman. Matt, are you aware of those options? I read that today too. It looks like there's a greater net savings if we go with option 1.
$1,000.
We are currently evaluating that through our consultant. You should know that on last Wednesday, the superintendent, myself, Cliff Gurnham, Steve Nydorf, and our counsel, Jeff D'Onofrio, had a Zoom meeting with CGI and relative higher performance contract, and we have a position paper that we will be sending back to Johnson Controls relative to some of the issues around performance on the contract. Some of them are pretty substantial. So that's about as far as I'd like to comment at this point, because we are currently engaged with counsel relative to what we feel are inadequacies in the delivery of the services from Johnson Controls to this point in the arrangement with them.
Matt, are these circumstances with switching the solar to the school buildings further complicating the issues with the performance?
No, those are outside of things that we already have issue with. But the switching of the solar is not part of of our substantial claims against JCI.
Okay, that's not holding up any payments from JCI?
No, because those were decisions we made.
Okay. Thank you for that. Ken, you had anything else regarding building committee?
Yeah, I had a couple of things. I wondered if you look at item 11,
Yeah.
the New England Road, which seems to be moving along, page 4 and item 11. My question there was whether there's any budget on that yet. Do we know what that's going to cost us to design the new Board of Education offices?
We have the design budgeted. I'll be darned if I remember what that number was. But
The design budget is 90% complete.
Yeah, for the design.
Right, for the design, but I wondered if we know what the project's gonna cost us.
No, that is the object of the design effort currently underway, is to determine what those costs would in fact be.
Okay, so we should have an idea of that fairly soon if they're 98% through,
Correct.
okay?
Is it just remind me, is it the intention of going out in like September, October to bid?
No, I'm not sure we're going to go out to bid until we have an appropriation, Mike. Mary Jane?
Well, I was wondering if we would get something regarding the something we could put in for the capital, for the bonding, or how would we be paying, doing that again?
I just want to remind the board that moving forward, that project hinges slightly on the audit of the high school. If you remember correctly, that audit was scheduled for March, and our auditor is yet allowed to come in and do that. At this point, I cannot promise when that audit will be done.
Okay.
That's the only thing in this time that's being held up in the smooth running part of the year. I had another point I wanted to make. I'm a little confused about item 13 on the district-wide interior door and lock project. Are they going to go, it seemed to be some doubt as to whether they were going to redo all of the doors and locks, or just those two schools.
It appears to me they tested the installation on the with the demo door, the installation, and then they're going to go back out and do price. Cliff's getting more pricing to feed back to the building committee.
As Cliff is saying that he, of course, just law of large numbers, he's saying that he would expect to realize some pretty substantial savings if they did it on every building in the district.
Right, but they needed to test it first to see how that would work for the installation, and if it worked well enough with the staff to be able to do the work themselves, then the question ends up being the pricing and the bulk ordering. Linda, I believe that's the case from the way I read it. So there's no decisions yet. They just needed to make sure that the installation was going to work fine if they did it in-house.
Cliff Burnham reported to the Board of Ed last Monday that the demo of the doors did go well. So it sounds like they're proceeding with that. I'm not sure what step they're at now, but they were happy with the way the demo went, and the staff that were there to see the door operation were very pleased with it as well.
Yeah, there should be more information in the for our next meeting that we'll read in the building committee.
They use the word expansive, but they mean expensive. It would be less expensive to use district staff than to hire contractors,
Right. Correct.
although both are true.
Yeah, and the one thing is, it was as the demo door. I mean, it's the demonstration as opposed to the demolition. I mean, I believe that there is some demolition, but the idea is to do door lock replacement.
Yeah.
So.
It all hinged on that.
Well done, Bob.
Boom, boom.
And he's out.
Mr.
I'm here all week.
has left the room.
Tip
Try
your
the
waiter.
How long did it take?
Try the veal.
This is what happens when you're zooming and there's no public.
That's right. But they'll get to watch it later.
The bigger picture is, according to these minutes, they were going to be finished on the school. They were going to report the school's facilities needs assessment tomorrow, the 21st. Is that still on target, Linda?
Yes, it is. Standing Building Committee should receive a draft report tomorrow.
Right. And then they're going to soak it in, and I'm sure we'll be hearing more about it.
We'll hear from you. Yeah.
They also noted in item 10 that they researched and found an area of savings on the Baldwin HVAC, a potential area for savings of about $140,000.
Mhm.
So that's encouraging too.
It is.
What was even more encouraging was that they didn't have to put piping on the roof and therefore putting more holes into the roof. They were able to do it on the inside. So that was good news, in my opinion.
Mhm.
I agree.
Okay.
Penetrations, that was the word I couldn't think of.
It's a hole. It's a hole.
Holes.
It's a hole. Fire
Yeah.
stop, but it's a hole.
Anything else in building committee? If not, pension. Pension committee minutes and the report. I don't think I had anything. This is the, this report is through, is this the due June 30th, right? So we almost had $3 million more from the opening balance. After the year we went through, the ups and downs, we came in ahead 3 million, up 3 million. It's good. Wasn't looking too promising in March and April.
No.
Where are they on this manager search? There are a number of companies referenced.
There was at the last pension committee meeting, they had conducted 2 interviews with 2 real estate investment trust firms. That's the piece that they're currently looking to reallocate or to change managers on. Given what's going on with coronavirus and the shutting down basically of offices throughout the country, there are some concerns of the pension committee about our position with REITs. Is that how it's said, Bob? REITs?
It is.
But it was pretty interesting to hear the presentation because it is when these REITs don't just have office space, they have data centers, they have or they don't just have shopping malls. It's pretty interesting to see the way they go about attacking their market. Bob, you probably are a little more familiar than I am with that stuff.
Well, you said it. I mean, real estate investment trust can invest in anything it likes, and if it looks like shopping malls are not the thing you want to be in, then you look around for somebody who gets one that's got, work from temporary office space or data centers or Bitcoin warehouses or goodness, whatever's hot. So it does. I'm glad that the committee decided to investigate. One of the senior members of the committee, who is a very experienced fund manager, said that they felt that it was important to maintain an exposure to REITs just because that's what one does in a pension fund. But I think they're doing the right thing by investigating the underlying assets here. And that was it. It was a good meeting. I think they looked at everything very closely. I wanted to know, and it's written up here, I just wanted to know if we're doing the town, on the education side, the employees are able to take lump sum distributions, which of course takes them out of a defined benefit program. And my concern was, are we doing our employees on the education side well? Are we sure that they're informed that if they step outside of a defined benefit pension, are they doing the right thing for themselves? Because I do know that they're all very heavily marketed by outside firms that would like their money to put them into 401ks and other
Agreed.
alternatives.
Agreed.
So
Bob, let me try to address that. There is some sensitivity to.
Yeah, they didn't want it to be financial advice.
Yeah, to be providing FAA type services to employees. So the typical program is Mitch Goldblatt, and I'm sure Sharon and Linda on the Board of Ed side fully explain the options to them. And again, we need to be very careful about providing advice one way or the other, that it's riskier to do one thing rather than the other. But I think, at least on the town side, the advice that we give is, if you have a financial advisor, please consult them as to what your best option is. If you don't have one, you should probably secure one and try to determine what your best option is. Obviously, we would prefer to discourage, lump sum withdrawals, which is why they've been negotiated out of most of the contracts over the past several years. But Bob, as you're probably getting to the point, is you can't legislate stupidity, right?
Well, I don't, yeah. So, I mean, one of the board members said, we used to do this in our pension fund, just explain to people what a defined benefit pension is, which is not giving financial advice, and that solves the problem. I just don't want the town to find itself in a position that any holder of a defined benefit pension didn't feel that they were well enough advised not to make that decision. That stupid decision, as you say.
Yeah,
especially,
agreed.
Especially with the world as it is. If somebody, gets out of defined benefit, let's face it, it's not, it's not necessarily in the taxpayer's interest to keep these things lit up. But forever and ever, if they all left them, there's less for us to be concerned about in perpetuity. But if somebody took it all out and put it into something that tanked because of whatever, there seems to be things going on in the world at the moment, we wouldn't want them to turn around and say, but you never told me. Right. That's all. It's not that big a deal, but it could be a big deal.
Agreed. And the other point, the other side of that is, because we advise them the way we do, we're concerned about their long-term financial health as well, because they could all, excuse the expression, they could all get screwed by an unscrupulous financial advisor. Not that there are any of those out there, but clearly there is the opportunity for some of our employees who dedicated their lives to providing services to our community who need to know that there are options for them. So I agree, Bob, and we'll continue to try to press that point as best we can without stepping over that line. Very
agreed.
Hey, Bob, I got a question regarding the REITs. Do you think maybe they were trying to make the point that the decline in the REITs is already priced in, and that we might just be realizing a loss if we decrease our position in the REITs?
It's only about, from memory, I think it's only about a 3-odd. It's not much of an allocation, between 2 and 3%.
Allocation.
And I mean, that argument was kind of made. It's there was the better the devil you know argument, but they're just going to keep looking at the situation, be sure that they're not, everything we have isn't in Manhattan office building and malls in New Jersey.
I'm not saying I know, but I panicked out sometimes and regretted it.
Oh, no, that's not in the air. But let's face it, it's a very solid portfolio. It's doing exactly what it should be doing. If only 3 or 4% of it is sending up a red flag, then they're doing their job to chase that. It's okay.
Agreed.
In my view.
If I could for a moment, if you take a look at the fiscal year beginning balance of $64,700,000 and an ending balance at the end of the month for June 30th of $67,400,000. We're basically 2.7 million ahead, which I want to counsel folks is less than our assumed rate of return, which I think at this point is 6.75, because we moved the assumption rate to 6.5 for fiscal year 2021. So the caution here is, yes, we've recouped a significant amount of what we lost in March through May or early part of June. And the contribution for the following year, for next year's budget, the 21-22 budget, is based on our status at the end of June 30th. So we did not make our targeted rate of return. So there is a possibility that our town Board of Ed contributions will be a little bit higher next year as a result, even though there's what, a 3-year smoothing on that, Mary Jane? Is that the number, or Bob? It's a 3-year smoothing?
Yep.
So this clearly impacts next year. While it's great news that we got back pretty much everything that we lost since early March or mid-March, we still will have some repercussions.
Okay.
Matt, what if we switch to like a 5-year smoothing?
Bob, you want to handle that?
I think it keeps us honest. You know, 5 years is probably makes it stops you from making, shall we say, more punctual decisions about where you're going. You could fall back a year or 2 or 3 and then find you can't dig your way out. So I think 2 or 3 years is appropriate.
Well said, Bob. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, anything else on pension?
I just noticed that the COLA, so you decided not to do the COLA. Is that something you're going to definitely do next year, or is it just up for review?
The long and short of it is the Board of Selectmen declined to make a decision on it, which is required by every 2 years, is for us to evaluate and determine if we want to adjust the COLA. The only contract that requires that is the police contract. We heard and we determined that we were not going to do that, but that does not preclude us from picking it up at any time. There's nothing in the contract that says we can't take a look at that next week, next month, or 3 months from now. There was a plea made once again at the Board of Selectmen meeting this morning in public forum by Jeff Hocking, who has apparently become the spokesperson for the retirees.
What happened to Mr. Roach?
I'm not sure, unfortunately.
That's Sergeant Roach to you.
Yeah,
Sergeant Roach, yeah.
that's right. She was probably never pulled over, Bob. Wait a second. There was a Collins in your. There wasn't a Collins.
Yeah, no relation.
Yeah, no relations. All right. But nonetheless, he made a plea at this morning's meeting that some of the good financial news that you will hear a little bit later today suggests that we were probably miserly, and we ought to revisit the assumptions we used to deny the COLA. I will say that the police union still has not, to my satisfaction, answered the question of why they alone should be considered for a COLA. When asked specifically about that early on in the not negotiations but the discussions by the representatives from the police retirees folks, they clearly wanted to separate themselves from the cost of providing COLA to every employee who has retired. So the proposal they made today was to revise the numbers that Milliman had provided to us relative to the impact of a 2.5% increase in the COLA. And they suggested they'd be happy to take what has become the average salary increase in settled contracts with our bargaining units over the next year at 2.25%. So they were gracious enough to suggest that they would not expect to take the 2.5% that was used for the Milliman projections in terms of the total cost, and they'd be happy to take the 2.25%. The board, that was presented to the Board of Selectmen in public forum at the end of the meeting. And I'm not sure that the Board of Selectmen is going to take up that issue anytime soon, despite the fact that what was represented was the fact that we anticipate, and I don't want to get rain on Mary Jane's parade, but there are some pretty good financial news coming relative to how we're going to end fiscal year 20. But I think we all talked about 20 wasn't the year we're worried about. 2021 and 2022 are the out years that we are very concerned about. And the gentleman who addressed the Board of Selectmen today fail to make that distinction. So that's more than you probably wanted to hear, but that's what happened today.
Thank you for the update. Anything further?
Was you wearing a mask?
Okay. I think
Everything's
we're good.
rosy. Everything's fine.
Everything's beautiful, yeah.
Yeah. Moving on. We are going to go to agenda item number 5, review and approve reported expenditures for the town government for June 2020. Mary Jane, all yours.
Okay, we'll start with revenue. As Matt alluded to just a few minutes ago, we are certainly ending June 30 in a much better financial position than we anticipated March and even April. Based on our projections in April, we would not have had the surplus we have now, but thanks to smart and consistent reopening and many of our departments and recreation, we were able to recoup some of the revenue that we had originally expected to be short. So we're looking at a $1.1 million surplus. If you look at the revenue reports that I provided today, you'll see that many of our departments have exceeded their budgets for the revenue this year, which again was a surprise by the end of the year. We did anticipate some of the budgets having going over in their revenue projections. I know one that you might want to note that hasn't reached their budget projection is the golf course, but they are only,
They're really
$6,000 shy.
Yeah.
They've had an absolutely tremendous year, and you'll see that they did well on their expenditure side as well. But so we did very well in our revenues, and I'd just like to also do a real short report on current year revenues, specifically tax collection in the current year. As you know, the Board of Selectmen allowed our taxpayers to have a 3-month deferral of the payment of their taxes. Matt has made a request to the taxpayers. Anybody that could pay their taxes should continue to do so in July as normal. We've been looking at the numbers. We've looked at the numbers twice this month specifically. Matt asked me to look at the numbers today. As of the collections today, we are about 20% lower than where we were this time last year. So tax collections are coming in at a much greater rate than we had anticipated with all of our cash flow projections. On top of that, we are expecting close to $20 million just in bank escrows. So we, based on these numbers, I have allowed all of the medical payments to be transferred in. We're moving our pension contributions. We have not held up anything based on these good projected numbers in the current year. So kudos to the taxpayers for paying their bills on time. And hopefully, what we had in our projections, anticipated less than 50% of the taxes coming in. So the 20% is doing a really good job to our cash flow. So that's just an aside for this year. I didn't know if anybody had any specific questions related to revenues last year or this year.
I have one question on revenues. With the impact of COVID-19 and all these adjustments that are being made to various town facilities, I was surprised that the revenue for the health department was below budget. I would think that they would have been collecting more revenues.
The health department, the coronavirus did not give us the opportunity to collect any more fees or so forth. In fact, the opposite would happen. Because of the coronavirus, we have not been able to perform as many of the inspections as we normally are able to do. So that is probably the reason for the shortfall there. You should know that today I authorized the health director to hire a part-time sanitarian. Some of you may remember the name John Siviak, who used to be the town sanitarian. I authorized Dennis Johnson to bring him on a per hour basis to start to do some of the inspections that have fallen by the wayside because Dennis has not been available due to the coronavirus. So that is probably the reason, Ken, and we're looking to recoup some of those fees.
Oh, I thank you for that. I think that was a very good move, because anyone who walks the green or walks the area can see there's an enormous amount of activity going on there. And
Absolutely.
Matt, just for more of the public consumption, to answer the question about the Dennis Johnson, when you say that he's unavailable because of COVID, what additional tasks and issues is he dealing with in terms of his role that's making him unavailable? And it's more for the public to hear.
2 words: contact tracing.
That's it.
And monitoring of coronavirus cases here in town. But not only that, but Dennis has become the advisor and the voice of reason to every decision we make relative to closing, opening, reopening, and as it relates to the DECD guidelines, as it relates to some of the restaurants. Dennis, on any given day, not to pick on one restaurant in particular, but he might be at Amarone's making sure that the tables are 6 feet apart. Not the least of which rationale is on any given day, we get a couple of complaints from the public about the appropriateness of the social distancing on these restaurants and these outdoor dining facilities. So he is spending a considerable amount of time making sure that our community is safe and our restaurants and businesses are adhering to the social distancing guidelines. Another instance is today, I believe he and Rick Maynard were up at Lake Quantipoc trying to figure out how we could open up that facility to the public. Given what's going on weather-wise around here, we are going to relook at opening up Quantipoc, because early on, between Dennis, Rick, and myself, it was determined that it wasn't effective for us to open up that facility given the number of people who would be able to take advantage of it because of the limited size and the social distancing requirements, and what we would need to hire in terms of staff, both gate guards, lifeguards, and parking lot attendants, to make sure we opened up. So today, Rick and Dennis were up there looking at how they could partition off that beach to see if we could actually open it up. So he's doing a lot of things that he never did before.
When he inspects the restaurants to see if they're, they can reopen or they open, does the restaurant pay the inspection fee, or is this something?
No.
Yeah. Okay.
These are all. This is all making sure that the restaurants are adhering to the reopening guidelines issued by the state of Connecticut through the DECD, relative to is there signage, are there partitions, are there arrows on the floor.
But we're not charging them for.
We are not charging for that at all.
Okay.
For us to do so to local businesses,
yeah,
would sort of be like pouring salt in the wounds, right?
Right.
It's no doubt that I knew he had an added workload and he was doing a lot. I just want to make sure it was clarified.
But it's not just the restaurants that he's visiting, it's other businesses as well, correct?
Absolutely, Jeff. Thank you.
Hair salons, nail, I mean, anything that's open right now that has the public in it.
Well, yeah, and you're absolutely right, Mike. The ones that are most significant are those kind of businesses where there are personal contact, where there's touching going on. The hair salons, nail salons, those things are number 2 behind the restaurants.
Yeah.
You take a downtown shop, pick any one of the retail facilities downtown. It's less onerous on him in order to make sure they comply. Basically, for the retail businesses, we're relying on the fact that they have gotten certification from the state of Connecticut, that they've made their application and submitted their plans for reopening. So we're not doing as many inspections there, but Dennis is doing an occasional inspection on some of those facilities.
Great. Mary Jane, anything else on revenues? Anybody else on revenue? We could head over to expenses.
Okay.
Can I make one comment, please?
Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to make sure that we're all aware that the finance revenue at 457 is a little bit less than what we projected for next year. Mary Jane, what's the number we use for next year for finance revenue?
5 something. I don't know exactly.
Okay. So just cautioning the board that given what's happened to interest rates and given what potentially could happen in terms of our cash on hand, that next year's number may be a challenge.
Yeah.
I think we talked about this earlier during budget season.
Yes, we did. It wouldn't
It'll be another
surprise me.
year talking about interest income every month.
Thanks, Matt.
Okay,
Thanks for the reminder.
Yeah, you're right.
Gotta keep it in sight.
I'm the one that should be thanking him because I'm the one that's going to be questioned on it. So we'll move on to expenses. I just want to remind the board that revenues as well, but specifically expenses, this is, there's a lot of work yet to be done for June 30. So these are the unaudited figures. A lot of transfers have yet to be made, grant transfers where we have grants that come in to cover salaries and supplies, other transfers such as to cover the overage and insurance. The library and the waste transfer station are being billed for their proportion of those expenses. So some of the overages that you see are in the works, and will be taken care of before you see the report next month. There may be some overages that will require us to request some transfers from the boards next month, but we'll be doing that as well. Some of the departments that have money left over at June 30 will be carrying that money over. For instance, I spoke of the legal line because we, did some 1-year extensions on our union contracts. Next year, we will again be under negotiations. So the money that we would have spent in this year to complete those full contract negotiations will be carried over to next year. So even though you see a relatively large number left to be spent for this year, we will be carrying that over to help next year's budget. So a lot of those things have not yet been done. We wait until we know that we have all the bills in and adjustments before we make our final transfers. So you'll see those next month. But if you have any specific questions, we are anticipating close to $500,000 surplus on the expenditure side. 200 or so is the number I'm still using for Board of Ed, unless when Linda reports that number has changed. which is fine, but that's just the number I'm using at the moment. We have also some surplus in the police department that I anticipate. And thanks to the energy performance contract, we have significant savings in streetlights because we purchased the streetlights. So we're seeing that we had not anticipated for this year. And the other area that we're seeing some significant savings due to a merger with the Connecticut Water Company is in our fire hydrants. I know that's one of the budgets we look at every year, and it pains me to give you the numbers that we budget, but we're actually seeing some significant savings this year, and I anticipate similar savings in the current year. So I like to bring good news every once in a while. But we will be having a surplus on the expenditure side, but again, I won't have more solid numbers until next month. If you have any specific questions, I can try to answer.
Are we waiting on any more revenues or expenditures on youth and family services? They're both slightly over, but I would have thought in the current environment that there'd be more activity.
I would anticipate, I would say in general, we would anticipate some revenue and expenditures in almost every department that we still collect and pay this month. If there's a supply or a payment that went out the last week of June, we often don't see that invoice or payment till the end of July. So I guess my general answer would be yes, I would not be surprised to see that in youth and family services.
Thank you.
Ken, let me answer that a little bit. Despite the fact that Youth and Family Services is currently at 109% of their budget on revenue,
Right.
That is inclusive of them having to dismiss a number of cases prior to the state allowing telemedicine, because there was a body of clientele that were not comfortable doing face-to-face consultations and sessions. And there was also, quite honestly, there was some of the staff was less than comfortable with that. So there was a decision made to basically, and this is an awful term, but to disengage from some of our traditional clients. Despite that, we still have been able to maintain, we're at what, 109%, largely because they relaxed the rules around telemedicine with Medicaid, and particularly in this case, through the state of Connecticut, as well as the executive order that was issued by Lamont that forced private insurance providers to cover telemedicine. So from that perspective, we were able to recover a significant amount of what we anticipated would be revenue loss on fees for service.
Yeah, and Ken, I'll also add that Youth and Family Services is one of the departments that has a grant that covers some of their salaries. So that over expenditure you see in their expense line would be covered by that as well.
Yeah. So Mary Jane, am I correct in my math here? It sounds like we've got about 500,000 lower, expenses are lower by 500,000 than expected, and then revenues higher by 1.1 million. So we're looking at a surplus of maybe 1.6 million or 1.7 million?
No, don't go that high. There are some things that we need to perhaps reserve and continue in force, particularly on the legal side. There are some concerns at Public Works about putting together a training budget because we're going to lose 3 of our 5 mechanics over the next 3 to 4 months, and we have no replacements in place for them. So I wouldn't use those numbers. I think it's going to be substantial, Jonathan. I think the number Mary Jane is using is about $1.2 million, right?
That's our overall estimate, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, and then I guess I don't want to spoil it for Linda, but do you know how the school's going to affect that surplus at this time?
Well, like I said, we've been using a number of 200,000, but Linda will maybe have an update during her report.
Okay.
I'm sure she will. I have one question on fire, on the expenditures, I looked and there's a big amount that is over on replacement salaries, and I'm not going to beat that. We've talked about the replacement salaries before. There's a lot of other categories though that seem to be over. I don't know, but and again, there's a COVID-19 line that is about $29,000 over, or I'm sorry, not over. It's not over anything. It's not a budgeted item, but there's 29,000 there. And then there's a lot of other items that are vehicle maintenance, operating supplies, and quite a few that are over. Was there any particular reasoning for those trending over?
I'll take the question on COVID-19. That was an account that was set up by Mary Jane in the finance department.
Yeah.
Because the anticipated reimbursement through either originally through FEMA, but secondarily through the CARES Act, through that the state of Connecticut received. So that is where the COVID-19 line came from. That COVID-19 was not a word that you knew, was not a phrase you knew about a year ago.
Right.
So that is.
I think sorry, I was just going to say, I think my question more is that the amount that's in that line item is much less than a lot of the other overages. So it leads me to believe that those overages are not COVID related. Are they issues that we should be concerned about because they're over? Like, for example, vehicle maintenance is, almost at $40,000 over. So, and that's with encumbrances. So there's just, is it a coincidence, or is it something that we should be worried about for next year, that, there's issues that we didn't address in the budget?
I think vehicle maintenance has to do with a piece of equipment that went bad that we didn't anticipate and had to be replaced. But Mary Jane, I'll let you answer that.
Yeah, and also you did mention the encumbrances. Keep in mind that many of these encumbrances will be going away, and that's what we're working on during this month. So it won't be over quite as bad as it looks.
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to the vehicles such as our fire trucks and our ambulances, it's not very hard to unfortunately have one large expense when something goes wrong. So we budget on an average, and some years it can be under, and this year it just happens to be over.
Mary Jane, quick question: Safer grant funds reflected in this number or not?
The last quarter is not reflected in here, so we will have a revenue, but keep in mind that the last quarter of our fiscal year is the first quarter of the 35% reimbursement.
Correct.
So our reimbursement is dropping. So, but that fund, we've billed them already. Mike and I have already billed the grant for that money, and as soon as it comes in, that will be put back into their lines.
Right. So that 271 number is going to be substantially different than that.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Okay.
Mary Jane, will our surplus also be enhanced because of some of the money we'll recover because of our COVID expenses?
Correct. We'll be booking a receivable for them.
And will we be able to recover the extra time for our health director?
The anticipation is, it's not the extra time for our health director. That's in the next budget year, Jonathan, that would occur. And the anticipation is, yes, we'd be able to file for those costs as well.
Keep in mind that, FEMA is covering the majority of the costs. FEMA rules are in play as if this were any type of catastrophe. So only overtime expenses are covered under any disaster. So the overtime put in by actually, there is some overtime in the fire department budget that we are going to be seeking reimbursement from. I don't have those numbers yet from them, but we do have those. But so because Dennis is a salaried employee and is not receiving overtime, his extra time working cannot be reimbursed because there is no expenditure for it.
How about the additional staff?
Yeah, that was what I was going to ask, Jonathan.
Yeah.
Yes,
I mean,
our
team's related, right?
this would be COVID-19 related because we could not, now, that's our contention. We have to make the case with FEMA.
Okay.
We- FEMA is not just giving carte blanche. They are denying things as quickly as they always do. So we are lucky to have the CARES Act, because the CARES Act is, the intention of it is to pick up where FEMA is unable to cover. So for instance, the laptops we bought for our work at home employees is not covered under FEMA, but will be covered under the CARES Act. So between the two, we're hoping to recoup as close to 100% as we can.
All right. Sounds good.
If all those line items are added up that are COVID-19, what's the, I didn't do it, but what's the approximate amount that we're in?
We anticipate about 300,000 for fiscal year 20.
That much? That's, okay.
That little.
Well, when I look a lot, I'm
Me
sorry.
too, Mary Jane. I would have thought more.
When I look at a lot of these items, it's, 30,000, 4,000. So I guess when you add them all up, all these departments, there's a couple here that are probably much more, are larger than I actually saw.
Right, and we actually received a notification from the CARES Act that we had to report how much we anticipated in COVID, and we are about average with all of our peer towns. So we're right on the right, along with everyone else.
Okay.
But that's essentially a quarter of the year is COVID expenses, right? So looking out over the next year, because unfortunately, I don't think this is going to be going away anytime soon.
Right.
That's a potential, $1.2, $1.4 million impact for expenses next year.
Yeah, well, keep in mind, we've done a lot of our facility improvements already. Those are one time. Purchasing, much of our technology is one time. So a lot of the larger ticket items hopefully would not be recurring.
Jeff, I think I know where you're going. Let's not spend the surplus that we have, because we may need it going forward. Yes, the 1.1 in additional revenue, and potentially, as Jonathan said, 300,000 to 500,000 or whatever the eventual number is, or 1.2, I think is the number Mary Jane is using. That may not be available for much other than to fill some holes going forward. And I think we talked about this at budget time, right?
Right.
And one of the items that the finance directors are really concerned about is, people are given a 3-month reprieve to pay their taxes in October. But January 1st, they come due again. And if they couldn't afford to get them paid by October, will they be able to afford to make their payment in January? So as we've talked a few different times in different ways, this year and next year, we could have substantial revenue problems because of that if things don't improve.
And not to get ahead of Linda, but we haven't even started looking at what the costs associated with getting the schools up and running again are gonna look like. So,
And,
I'm gonna leave that to her.
Well, I, for one, would love to give this.
And Ted's here now. Yep.
and Mary Jane, it's true that when you go, if you know people in the banking industry, you know how far behind people are in mortgages, but the banks tell their clients, pay your house tax. Before you pay the mortgage, be sure you pay the house tax. So if
Right.
if
And
this
if they
is the
have
last hurrah,
a mortgage, usually their taxes are probably covered through there. So hopefully that's the thing. But
it's
it's
a
just-
percentage, it's a quarter of them maybe, I don't know. I don't know what it is in Guilford. In fact, I know.
It's just a concern that, we just want to stay ahead of, that's all.
Yeah, no, I'm quite concerned. I think you're absolutely right in your assessment of what happens in October and then January.
I think the reminder here is that when we went through the budget process and what our decision was as a board, for lack of a better phrase, was thoughtful and conservative. And we didn't want to touch a lot of the unassigned fund balance, and we were very conservative in those numbers, knowing then we may get a huge hit later on. So I think, although this is good news that we're hearing, it's just possibly delaying the inevitable that we're going to have to use it for some really large expenses later on that were not at all planned. So
It's today's news. That's what it is. Today's news. Tomorrow could have a totally different story.
Right. We'll be monitoring it monthly, as we always do. Anything else for, oh, wait a minute, Mary Jane, we got more. Warrants. Anything else on expenses? Warrants. Special fund, any of the warrants, weeklies.
I have one question on the special funds.
Go ahead.
What are those two I asked about sight lines last month, but I now see two
That's the study.
dollar.
That's the assessment, needs assessment for the Board of Ed. Sightlines is the consultant.
Yes, okay. Okay, thank you. And I do see on the summary of the warrants on the pink sheet that there is a COVID-19 under legal that Mr. Barrett has taken, has used, and that's $5,670. Why is that outside? That's the only COVID-19 thing that I see in there.
If you remember, as we were going through the budget process, we relied very heavily on on legal counsel to get us through the executive orders and making sure that we were taking all the proper steps and precautions.
Okay.
And with that came a price. And the CARES Act is allowing those legal expenses to be reimbursed. So we will be recouping those numbers, or that's what we're told right now, at least.
Does that include any of the labor costs associated with, extending some of the contracts for a year?
No,
No.
no, it doesn't. Chris Hodgson is our labor attorney. We're not entitled to that. It is legal advice specific to COVID-19 related activities. Pete is not the only one. We have engaged, I think some of you recall that Matt Ritter was actually on a couple of our calls. So you'll see expenses related from Shipman and Goodwin that are COVID-19 as well. I'm going to take an opportunity to make a great plug for Mary Jane. She has made sure that we are identifying and tracking everything that smells, looks like, tastes like, looks like COVID-19. The department heads are completely aware that they are to, if they have any idea that it might be COVID related, to make sure they report it.
Well done.
Thanks, Matt.
You're welcome, Mary Jane.
Finally, medical. So I did notice the first thing I looked at was we went over 70%. So
Yes, I specifically put that data point in there so that we
thank you. It made it easy to find.
Yeah, again, we really expect that COVID is the reason that our expenses are low. The HSA is a part of it, but to have some of the months be so low, it's really people not going to the doctor for every little ache and pain like we might do on a regular basis. Elective surgeries were held off for some time, and some places still aren't doing that. I said to the Board of Selectmen this morning, if I only had a crystal ball, I could tell you if we were going to recoup those next year or not. But I really don't know. But we really, that surplus that we have in there, again, just like you spoke about with the general fund, comes into play. If those expenses should come back full force, we'll need that surplus in there to cover them.
Yeah, I can't imagine that at some point those numbers are not going to drive back up again, and it's going to be a catch-up. I mean, people need medical services, and if they're just delaying them, it just means they're going to need more, and it's just going to be piled on later. I'm sure that's one of the things that's going to be talked about, right, when the insurance numbers come up for next year's budget. I can't imagine it's not going to go up.
Mike, I agree with you. We need to be careful about assuming that the surplus we have there today is all ours to do what we with what we please. However, I was corrected earlier today after making some comments this morning. If you do the April year-over-year numbers, they are relatively close in terms of expenditure. Because those would have reflected the February and March billings or services provided to our employees. But if you look at May and June, those numbers are down by about 900,000 over the previous fiscal year.
Mm-hmm.
One of the challenges with trying to predict this is most healthcare plans allow you what? A home care visit or a healthy visit once a year. A dental visit once a year. So I think we will see some, we will realize some of that $900,000 or projected $900,000, if you will, in savings versus the previous year. But clearly there will be some things that were moved off that don't have that same requirement where you're only entitled to one healthy care visit a year or one dental cleaning, et cetera, a year. So I think we're going to see some savings. I wouldn't spend it yet until we see the impact over 3 or 4 months after the coronavirus basically has calmed down.
Couldn't agree more.
You know, we're looking at maybe $2.5 million of surplus in this budget. And I just really think we ought to give it back to the taxpayers. It's a lot of
Jonathan, I knew you were going to say that. That's why I just told you. There's $900,000 expense there that theoretically should have been there if it weren't for coronavirus, because that's what we spent last year. However, are you comfortable that there isn't pent up demand relative to a healthcare expenditure that says they're going to next year's number is going to be that much higher because they have foregone medical stuff over the last 3 to 4 months?
I don't know. I think the surplus isn't that far off from the prior year's surplus.
Well, and again, this board, I think, has demonstrated a willingness to take surpluses from this account and to fund the OPEB trust, which is in fact a taxpayer relief program, because that will eventually relieve the taxpayers of the burden of paying for OPEB benefits for our retirees. So if the first place I would look to move that money would be the same place you and we have gone the last 2 years, and that would be $200,000 2 years ago and $1 million last year to fund the OPEB trust. So I agree with you 100%, Jonathan. We may disagree on where you put it.
Yep.
Okay.
I guess maybe I'll just say something about the OPEB trust because it is on hold right now.
I was going to ask it under old business, so you just took it out of old business. Well
Matt
done.
brought it up, so I figured while I had the floor, I was just going to take it. You know, as I've been reporting, part of our need for the OPEB trust is to change our ordinances, and in order to do so, we need public hearings and town meetings to do so. And although we've been able to have some of those for emergency purposes, the OPEB trust at the moment hasn't, come up to that level. It is my intent to continue, to have that take place as soon as we can, and all of our ducks are in the row and ready to go as soon as we can do that. All of our consultants and our auditors are aware. We've spoken to our rating agencies about it. Everybody knows that we're looking to move forward, but my hands are somewhat tied due to the, COVID-related needs for the public hearings. So.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm not done. We're going to do it.
Understood.
We are.
I have one more comment on something else, if I'm allowed. I just wanted to report that we had a successful rating agency call with Fitch. We have our bond sale coming up in August like we do each year. We were able to use our prior rating agency call for the refunding along with this, but Fitch has reaffirmed our AAA rating. We had a very good conversation with them. I think it was an hour and a half or longer, just talking to them about a number of things, but we are in very good shape moving forward for our bond sale next month.
I was delighted to hear that. You may have seen, not that we're Hamden, who's running a $6 million deficit, but they got downgraded to one step above junk. And the way analysts think and the way rating agencies think is everything is comparable and there's always contamination. So I was thrilled to hear that it shouldn't have been a surprise, but I was concerned.
Thank you, Bob.
In this environment.
By the way, Mary Jane did a great job pulling together the materials for that call. I, as the pretty face, get to say a lot of nice things about our community. Mary Jane gets to answer the tough questions relative to the finances, but clearly the agent, Fitch, was impressed with the presentation we put together. But not only that, but they're impressed with what's going on in this community. And I want to thank the entire Board of Finance, because you guys are as much a part of getting us to this point as anybody is.
I'll second that for Mary Jane. I know how much heavy lifting goes into those presentations and the attention to detail. So
yep.
Thank you very much.
Good team effort. Mary Jane, anything else you would like to add?
I'd be done now.
You're okay now? All right.
Cut and run. Let's go.
All right.
Just my motion for my.
Yeah. Here it comes. So at this point, I will entertain a motion to approve the report of expenditures of the town for the month of June 2020 in the amount of $2,352,486.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions or recusals? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mary Jane.
Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. And now we're going to go backwards to item number 4. Ted, welcome. Review and accept report of expenditures for the Board of Education for June 2020. Linda and Ted.
Okay. Well, expenditures for the month of June were $9,820,758.86. Expenditures and encumbrances through the end of June were 99.02% of budget as compared to 98.96% last year. The warrants for the month were $3,200,913.82. The expenditures in June were larger than we would normally do because we have some staff that get paid on a 12-month basis, although they only work 9 months. And so we normally pay them in June for the summer months. So that the payroll is a little heavy that month. But other than that, and the fact that Linda and her staff have been hounding the vendors to get their invoices in if they want to get paid. So there's, instead of the usual 7 or 8 pages of warrants, we have 15 pages of warrants this time because people are starting to listen to Linda. But other than that, it's there's nothing really unusual in the month. we can go through the accounts or the warrants and answer any questions that you would have. I would just caution you that this isn't the close for June. Linda and her team are still getting bills in, and so the close won't be for, I believe, Linda, another week or 10 days. But so that there's still people scrambling around trying to get their stuff in, but so we're not sure what the final number is going to look like yet.
Thank you, Ted. To go to that point, I was looking at some of the Board of Ed minutes, and actually it was right at the end. I was looking at that there is or was an approval requested on July 7th in a memo regarding transfers.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's something that Linda or Ted, you wanted go over as far as where there were transfers and where there were savings and where, because I noticed in a lot of the categories there were quite a few that were over on the line items and others that were well under, and they were big. They were pretty big budget items. So I don't know if there's something you could summarize regarding the transfers to from in summary.
I think that it's probably better to wait until next month.
Okay.
Because there'll be additional transfers that'll, some of what we did may come back, and, we're required to not run deficits in each one of these sub-accounts. Right. But the transfers, these were, the ones that were in June were preliminary.
Okay.
The ones that we'll have next month, and I'll be the reviewer next month also.
Mm-hmm.
I promise you, we will sit down and go over the two groups of transfers together, and I think it's be much easier to understand on that basis.
Okay.
So, Mike, these transfers that were done are to keep the 7 categories of the budget within line. We don't balance every single account.
Right.
Just make sure that the bottom line of each category. So this was so that June would end with positive numbers for each of these categories. And we will have to do some for the final one to close out.
Okay, so this is the preliminary budget transfers that totaled about if I'm looking at this right, 430,000
Yes.
in totality. Right, and so there'll be additional ones at the next meeting, and then Ted, as you indicated, next month we can go over the totality of the transfers. Okay.
Yep.
And I understand it's the categories, not the line items, but it's the categories themselves. I'm trying to remember. Is there that much of a swing of almost $500,000 in transfers?
Yes.
Is that common?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
But remember, it's a 60 million budget.
I know tuition at times has been, that's probably been 500,000 in and of itself alone, right? So.
Well, and surprisingly, tuition is not the problem this year.
Right.
There have been years when we've had $1 million of special education over expenditures that we've covered from other accounts. So yeah, right now this number is not out of line with what we normally do.
It is, I guess, refreshing not to see tuition in there.
Yes.
Question about transportation?
What's that, Ken?
A question about transportation.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Transportation for regular buses is down, it's 93%, but special ed is 113% over. Is that because of the uniqueness of special education requirements, even during these trying times?
Yes. So the regular buses is down because we negotiated a discount for the 3 months that they weren't transporting students, or 3.5 months. Per the governor's order, we agreement with them with specialty transportation on a reduced rate for their contract. The special education buses is really two factors. One, it was the transportation needs of the students, but there was also a large invoice at the beginning of the year for the summer transportation that was a lot higher than what we had budgeted for. Specialty was new the previous year, and they stated that they did not bill us for all the services that we should have paid for. So when we built, we didn't have a good base to build off of. So their expenditure was a lot higher for summer transportation than anticipated. And those are really the two big factors.
That's summer of 2019 transportation, right, Linda?
Right.
Yeah.
So summer of 2019's transportation was a lot higher than, because they do transportation for July and August for the summer programs, and those were a lot higher.
Linda, can I ask you about a few more of the larger deviations?
Sure.
Right, probably a few of them. I guess maybe this is kind of good news, but we spent less money than expected on information services salary. I don't know why though.
Okay. So that one is a couple things. They had a position that was unfilled, actually 2 positions that were unfilled. One of them was a school technician, was covered by another technician. One was the secretary in the office, or administrative assistant in the office, was left vacant for a while and was filled with a part-time temporary person. Factor was we used to have a technology integration specialist. When that person left, it was hired by a person who was a certified teacher. So that position's expense salary was transferred over to the teacher's line and was left unspent in the information technology line.
Okay, so just kind of vacant positions really kind of
Yes.
up, right? Okay, then we go on to another one. Ducks in the way, exactly the way I want to do it. Yeah, I think the next one was telephone and internet I was curious about. Would have thought maybe it would have been cheaper without as much activity in students. Looks like we overspent on telephone and internet by a good percentage. I guess not a huge dollar figure, but 35,000 or so. Not anything to laugh about, I guess.
So part of that is the internet at the high school that we previously had not paid for was covered by the state that we now have to pay for. And then the other part of it was that we were not receiving the E-rate credit that we were supposed to be getting on our internet charge. So we have billed for that. We actually just received that right at the end of June. And that didn't make this report, and that was about $10,000 of credits that we did not receive.
All right, well, that'll help a little bit more.
Yes.
I think we had talked about the internet service got more expensive and we have to pay for it.
Yes.
All right, how about upkeep of building and grounds? That was pretty substantial.
So that
$250,000.
Yeah, that'll come down a little bit. There was a lot of encumbrances in there that were left open as we close out the year. But that will be over budget. It's been over budget every year for a number of years. It's a whole number of different things, from all the required testing, all the required maintenance, the HVAC work that needs to be done, and we all know what the HVAC work has cost us this past winter. So all those charges are all rolled into those lines, but that encumbrance number will go down, so the account will be a little bit better than 128.9% over budget.
Okay, couple more to go. I see legals over a good amount.
Yes.
Is that expected? You might have told this story already, but I can't remember.
No, it wasn't expected. Some of it is special ed legal, some of it is contract negotiations that is going on. Some of it is legal for trying to get money for the students that were from the high school that were supposed to go on a trip during April break. The company did not want to issue a refund, so we've engaged in some legal services to try and rectify that situation. So we spent some legal to renegotiate some MOUs to operate through the COVID crisis and work on agreements with our unions during that as well.
Okay. Wow, just ran into some legal entanglements.
Mm-hmm.
All right, just a couple more on the last page. I just asked about computer software. So we spent $43,000 more than expected on software.
So part of it was some unbudgeted increases for software that we use. And then some special software that was purchased for use for the teachers during the distance learning.
Yeah, I thought it might be Zoom or something.
Zoom for the most part was free. We did have to purchase a special Zoom package, but it was a minimal cost. There was some other software programs that were purchased for teachers to use for distance learning. There was a number of items on the warrants you see for Seesaw reimbursement. While small dollar amounts, they were all software for the teachers. And then there was a big one, and I don't remember the name of it off the top of my head, that is part of that encumbrance that's in there. Something else for the teachers.
Okay, this one really surprises me, the custodial. 5% higher than expected. I would have thought it would have been lower.
No, because that's
No.
a lot of
Okay.
Purell cleaning stuff, fogger machines, masks, PPE equipment, all got.
This is where all that went.
Okay, yeah, there might be some relief there, right, between CARES and FEMA.
Right. So our CARES money is on hold right now, pending some clarification on some of the language in the funding. So I did submit some invoices to Mary Jane to pass on to FEMA for us. So we have hopefully some money coming for reimbursement for that.
All right, well, the last two are in the capital there. I guess the instructional equipment, I guess that's the computer leasing and site improvements.
All right, so the equipment instructional is the computer leasing, and some of that we will get back, and I have not booked the receivable for the full amount that we have due from the leasing company for the items we've purchased. So that will be reflected in the final report. And then site improvements, I think we've talked about it before. We had done a lot of projects over the summer last year. And then with school being out, we've taken the opportunity to do some projects in the buildings that we could to get some things done when we didn't have students in the building.
Okay, that might make sense. Not easy around the student, obviously.
We're trying to use the to do these projects when the kids aren't there. I mean, these are things that we're going to have to do as part of the coming year anyway. And we just got a chance to get a little bit of a head start on something.
I have a couple of questions.
Ken, before you go, I just wanted to say on the encumbrances for site improvements, is there any idea what percentage of that is going to continue to be used or carried over, or too early to tell yet from Cliff?
I don't have an answer yet.
Okay, that'll go through Cliff.
Yeah, we're working on that one.
Understood. Okay. Ken, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, two questions on the student activity accounts. On the warrants on page 8, you show an $86,000 reimbursement. And then you show on your summary sheet another $10,000 reimbursement for parking fees. Could you comment on those two things?
Sure. So the $10,000 that's on the summary sheet is $10,000 that comes from the parking passes and tickets from the high school to offset the cost of the security guard, crossing guard up at the high school. Part of the agreement with the high school is they pay a portion of that position out of those funds. So that's the $10,000 coming back to the Board of Ed to offset the cost. The other one is funds that are budgeted in the Board of Ed, but paid for, so they're budgeted in the Board of Ed, but the Student Activity Fund pays for them first and then bills the Board of Ed to get reimbursed. So it's things like the hockey ice time where the high school pays the full bill and we get billed for a portion of it because we only pay $20,000 for hockey ice time, even though they pay way more like 100,000. They pay the officials right away because they have to be paid when they do the games, and we reimburse them for the expense. So there's items that are paid all year long, and then we settle up at the end of the year by transferring the money back over to the Student Activity Fund to reimburse them. And we've been doing this transaction for years. We've been doing this process.
Okay. I have just a question. We're going Board of Ed meeting minutes on June 8th, not the operations, but the regular meeting. I guess it's page, well, can't say 3.2. It's actually item 9.2. It talks about the non-renewal of non-tenured teachers. And there was a comment that Dr. Freeman clarified the teachers did an outstanding job in not being renewed due to budget and staffing reductions. Is this the, was this the non-renewal of the teachers that were talked about at Adams? Was this part of the budget, or is there something? Could you explain that on the non-renewal?
I believe that was part of that restructuring of Adams. I'm not sure if there were any teachers involved in that non-renewal that weren't part of that.
What got my attention was the
Sure.
due to budget and staffing reductions. And I remembered that, you know, during the budget process there was, but that was really for the next year's budget. So I didn't know if that was reflective of those positions that were being looked at as being reallocated, so to speak.
Right. I believe it is. We have to do that by a certain time of year.
Right.
So I think that was part of that process.
Okay.
We have to do that, and it's also part of this whole process of trying to be fair to the employees. It may be that some of those employees will in the future get hired back, but we need to tell them with enough warning so that they can go out and look for something else if they need to.
Isn't the issue larger than that? That if you're cutting positions, that those in senior positions have the ability to bump down and take people out of their current positions. So that's why you tell the non-tenured positions every year that their jobs are at risk.
Well, that's also the case. That's right.
Okay. I do tend to remember that now. It took me a second, but I remember that from a couple past years.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's what's called bumping. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Linda, I've got a question about the surplus on the medical expenses. Is that surplus for real, or do you still kind of owe the town another contribution towards medical?
No, that's real. We have given the town everything that we were supposed to give them.
Okay.
We should, I know you had a discussion about this medical thing earlier, but I mean, we talked at length in the operations committee about the fact that this account has been going our way this year. And our consultant gave us two things to be a little cautious about. One is the idea that there's a certain amount of elective stuff, people who are going to have hip replacements or whatever, that got put off because the hospitals just aren't doing that, or people are afraid to even come close to the hospital. And so those are not expenses that'll go away. It's just that they haven't been incurred as they normally would have been. And the other is that there is a certain amount of expenses relating to employees and dependents who will in fact get the virus. And there's a significant lag between when somebody goes into the hospital and gets into the ICU and when the bill actually hits our account. It's several months. And so we haven't started to see the COVID costs yet, but we may. We don't have an estimate of how many of our covered employees that between us and the town, it's what, 1,300 employees, I think. 1,300 people are covered. I don't know how many of those have come down with the virus, but we have to assume that some have. And we'll get those bills. And the consultant told us that if, God forbid, somebody that are covered, people who are covered by our plan are put in the ICU, I mean, we're talking about bills of more than $250,000 per individual, and it could go higher than that. So, you know, the medical account looks good right now, but I'm not ready to spend it yet.
Matt.
Mr. Chairman?
Yep. Go
Ed, perhaps you didn't understand the question as asked. The line here is the annual agreed to contribution by the Board of Education, which has nothing to do with claims. You are currently $330,000 short of what had been budgeted to contribute to the medical account, regardless of the claims. So I think the question was asked, is the Board of Education intending to make that contribution to the medical, or is that going to fall to the surplus, which I think we heard earlier today is $200,000, earlier tonight is $200,000. So I'm suspecting you didn't hear the question that was asked, unless I'm making a mistake here. But this was the budgeted amount that the Board of Education was going to contribute to the account, regardless of the claims.
That was my question, Matt. You clarified it very well.
So everything that was budgeted for the Board of Ed to contribute to the town has been received, and I believe Mary Jane can confirm that we have made all of our contributions. There is an outstanding invoice that's not reflected in this report for the food service insurance for June, because we had not received that bill yet. That one's small. This account will be under budget for the year, and a lot of that has to do with the employee contributions, because of the way we budget the full amount that gets that goes to the town, and then we offset the bottom line with the employee contributions, the HSA contributions, all those other items that are budgeted for. But this account will be under budget for the year.
Excuse me,
Listening to
quick
Ted's comments, though, a question comes to mind for me. Because we're self-insured, would CARES or FEMA cover our expenses, actual expenses to treat the illness?
I don't believe so.
Yeah, I haven't heard any talk about covering any type of medical bills, no.
Okay.
Just a quick question. When in our last round before the approving the budget and cutting $200,000 from the Board of Ed, am I not recollecting correctly? Wasn't 180,000 of that there was a reduction in the contribution to the medical fund?
It won't reduce the contribution to the medical fund. What it's doing is going to correct the fact that I had underestimated the amount that was going to be received from the employees and the retirees to offset the medical. So I'm still going to make the full amount of the contribution that we were agreed to during our budget discussion. The 180 is going to offset the other items that are included in the medical line.
Thanks, Linda.
Okay. Is there anything else under, let's see, anything else, minutes, warrants?
So we haven't really talked about it yet tonight. We touched on it briefly.
Yep, go ahead.
The tuition line, for the year, it looks like it's going to be about $70,000 under budget. That is due to, yay! First time I've said that in a long time.
Boy, no kidding.
We've had some changes due to COVID. Some students who were eligible to graduate decided to graduate early instead of staying on and doing distance learning. So that saved some expenses. We've had some movement earlier in the year with some students changing facilities, which saved us some money. So all in all, it's helped our bottom line tremendously. So that will come in under budget by about $70,000, maybe a little bit more.
Fantastic.
Thank you. And right now we are still projecting to be about $250,000 under budget in total for the year. So a little bit more than what Mary Jane has been using. We don't have the final number. We won't until the end of July, early August, but that's kind of what it's looking like right now is $250,000.
Don't take that to the bank yet.
No, we already
Can
told that too, so.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Linda and Ted, we talked about this at budget time, the unexpected cost of the continued coronavirus impact. Have you guys come up with any numbers or assessments relative to what it may cost you to continue to operate the school district under the conditions that may have already been imposed or may be imposed by another shutdown, before we just assume that 250 should fall to fund balance? Should there be a consideration by the Board of Finance that they establish a designated fund to help the school district with the coronavirus stuff?
Well, let me answer that, Linda, because we did discuss that tonight, but I was in a Board of Ed meeting before I came to this one. The answer is, it is still too early to know how we're going to open the schools. And put it bluntly, the rules just keep changing.
Yeah.
We are trying to develop a plan and we actually have to have 3 plans. One for the students coming back, all coming into the schools, one for a portion of students in the schools at any one time, and a 3rd plan for continuation of the distance learning. So we have not fleshed out those plans enough that we have a solid view of what these costs are going to be. But I would advise the Board of Finance that there are several areas where it is pretty clear to us that we're going to run over budget. For example, it is likely that we will have to put monitors on the school buses to help ensure that the students are wearing their masks and that they're maintaining some social distancing. It's just not possible for the bus driver to drive the bus and control the kids at the same time. And this has come down from the state. And we are having to order additional cleaning supplies, PPE supplies, etc., that were not anticipated, and this is not going to be a trivial expense. We probably will have much higher substitute teacher costs because some of our teachers will not be able to come back for health and other reasons. So there are a lot of moving pieces here. The one thing I can tell you is that it is extremely unlikely that we're going to be on budget. How much this is going to cost is going to depend on what we ultimately do in opening the schools. And it may be also, and this is what the state has advised us, if we open the schools with one plan and we have a flare-up in the virus here in the state, we may have to drop back to a different plan. So, I mean, it's going to be very, very hard to forecast this. But I think that the money that we could get from the federal government and the state to offset these costs is not going to be adequate to cover these costs. There are going to be additional costs. I just don't know how much they are.
And I think that's a very candid set of insights from you, Ted. I think we ought to put that against the national statistics that are occurring, where there are current estimates that as many, at least a minimum of 20% of the teaching staff in the various school districts in this country may choose not to come back to school. That's a pretty reliable statistic. That measured against another statistic which tells us that children themselves may be more carriers than anyone had ever thought before. So it's very complex, and you addressed the question. I think that these budgets themselves are going to be up for very serious reconsideration. We don't know what the federal government will do. We don't know how much the state will support us. And with the 3 plans that you guys have, the 3 options that you have to go full, to go partial, to go zero, that's all up for grabs.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, there's a lot here that we just can't predict. For example, at the moment, the state is not requiring us to test on a weekly basis, for example, our staff. Other states are. And if there is a virus flare-up, that guidance from the state may change. Well, that's pretty expensive stuff. I mean, assuming we could even find the testing capability locally, you know, that would be real money. But at the moment, I mean, that's not a requirement, but it's something that, you know, we're having to keep in mind. There are a lot of things like that that could be expensive that we just don't know yet. We just don't know. And the one thing I can promise you is that we'll try and be very frank with you going forward as we get our hands around how we're going to do this and we start to cost this stuff out. We won't be shy in sharing it with you, but we just don't have it yet.
We're grateful to you for sharing all this with us tonight.
Wanted to ask a question that I'm not going to take credit for. It was a question that came up from one of the board members to me, and I guess it's directed Linda, Ted, you know, and even Matt and Mary Jane. You know, we're meeting monthly, and you know, I don't want to create more work for us, but I mean, as far as a board of finance and the amount of expenses, should we consider for a period of time having some level of, you know, maybe before school kicks in, before our next meeting, in between meetings, have some sort of special meetings to discuss, you know, the finances? Do either, you know, Matt, Mary Jane, Linda, Ted, you know, what are your thoughts on meeting more often regarding the finances? I mean, this is a unique time. There's going to be a lot of changes. Is there a feeling that we should do that and have updates basically just on COVID-19 expenses, or are we not there yet?
I don't think
I'll take that.
I'll take the Board of Ed first and then Matt and Mary Jane. So
we're not there yet. I would share with you that the Board of Ed is meeting weekly now, and sometimes more than weekly. Because I mean, this thing is really moving, and there's just a lot to go over. I really can't answer your question. We don't have enough right now to justify that, but I'm not sure when we would start to.
I think I'm offering it more as a gesture
as we go along.
Yeah, I think it's offering more as a gesture if there's, you know, there's questions or anything that we could do on our end, because we know it's a big load. Now, adding another meeting is probably an even bigger load, and probably that would weigh it out, right? So, Matt, Mary Jane, your thought?
Hey, Mike, data is data. Doesn't necessarily mean you need a meeting to contemplate data.
Okay.
So I will commit that on Mondays, on every Monday, the town will provide to the Board of Finance a reclamation of what we have collected in terms of taxes against what we had collected the previous year. That's going to change dramatically over the next 2 weeks because we're going to have a significant infusion of tax revenue coming from mortgage payments. So we'll be happy to do that. You guys get our monthly expenditures. I think you heard earlier, we're at what, $300,000, Mary Jane, in terms of COVID expenses. So from the town side, that's sort of like nits, right? Doesn't really matter. I won't speak for the Board of Education, but whatever you guys can provide on a bi-weekly manner electronically would probably be helpful. I'm not sure you need to have a meeting to discuss that kind of stuff. If you lay out the information you are looking for from us and we can provide it, we'll be happy to do it. I think right now, the biggest thing that we need to, on the town side, the biggest thing we need to concern ourselves with is tax collection and what's happening with interest income. And Mary Jane's going to shake her head, but I'm pretty sure she'll provide that either on a Friday or a Monday or a Tuesday or a Wednesday, whatever day you guys want it. on a consistent basis, or more than once a week, if you guys need it real, if you're going to want to pay that kind of attention. So you tell us what kind of data you want, and we'll try to provide it to you.
Mary Jane?
I concur. I don't believe we need an additional meeting, and the stress of getting all of that documentation together for you more than once a month. Obviously, if there was an issue, we would ask to have you convene a meeting if there was a major issue. For instance, if the tax revenue wasn't coming in and I was going to recommend either not making medical or pension contributions, that would be a decision that I would look for, buy-in from this board, and maybe we would have needed to have a special meeting. I was going to suggest, similar to what Matt said, providing some type of, if you're willing to just get a Munis printout, which I prefer to give you other than what I give you anyway, I can give you a Munis printout of revenues and expenditures every week. Clearly, we don't do expenditure, we're not posting them. The problem is we're not posting them immediately, but so I confer with the tax collector to make sure that we have all the tax collections in, so I can provide that. And I would say in a similar manner as the pension committee still receives weekly updates as to the status of the pension, the pension fund. So I can certainly provide you whatever data you want, but I wouldn't recommend a meeting really unless we needed one.
I wouldn't want to add any workload, unnecessary workload. And I want to make sure it's clear that if there was any kind of a additional meeting, it wouldn't be it wouldn't be to provide all of the information. If anything, it's more of an update. I don't know. I was throwing it out there because one of the board members brought it up, and I thought it was a fairly good idea just to raise the issue to see if there was any need for it. If there's not, then maybe whatever the Board of Selectmen get in terms of data, the Munis report, maybe not every week, but every other week, whenever they get it, just sharing it with us, just so we can keep an idea. So we're, again, just privy to the information that's going on. So it's not 1 month, maybe it's every 2 weeks or something.
Yeah.
Well, Mike, the reality is the Board of Finance gets and Board of Selectmen get the same data every month.
Every month.
Mary Jane and I have the opportunity to talk to each other. Well, we used to do it much more regularly when we were both in the office at the same time about what was going on. Now we do it via Zoom or whatever it is. But nonetheless, if you guys want to define what kind of information you want on a semi-regular basis, we'll give it to you. I don't, again, we can presume to know what you want to see. And Mary Jane's got probably the biggest computing power of anybody in town on her device on her desktop, so she can produce any kind of reports you guys want.
Yeah, my only issue is we input specifically to make sure that everything is up to date for this meeting every month. A week from now doesn't necessarily mean I have any more tax revenue in, because we might be concentrating on something else. So, a simple download from Munis, even though that's what I said, may or may not be the best thing, but any specific data you want, I can pull that together easily enough.
I just want to throw in that we've heard from the biggest budget in town and from the revenue side, and both have demonstrated their sense of risk, and there's risk on both sides. Expense could go up, revenues could fall. I think really it's probably important for the revenue side to keep Board of Ed apprised of what's going on, so they know what they have to work with, because it's really a blood from stone situation at that point.
Great.
It seems to me that at least right now, having another meeting is not going to really add much value. I think the two things that we're keeping an eye on the town side is, we got the update tonight that the tax payments that we were expecting we're going to be off perhaps up to 50% or only down 20%. That's great news. That's a new type of format that the town introduced that we weren't sure what the response was going to be from the citizens. We touched on it earlier that what the January tax installments are going to look like may be indicative, maybe a better indicator. So I think going forward with the month-to-month meetings is going to be, at least in the short term, what we need to do. If January rolls around and tax revenues are off substantially, then I think it might be worthwhile to talk about, getting updated more frequently. On the Board of Ed side, I mean, they're still figuring out what they're trying to do to open the schools, and they don't have a firm grasp on what those figures are going to look like or what the actions are going to look like for that matter. So I don't think, and I don't think until they actually start rolling those things out or have a better handle on it, there's really any value that we're going to get from asking them to meet with us more frequently. I think once the schools open and we have a better idea as to what's going on, then maybe it's worthwhile to get updates more frequently. But right now it just seems well-intentioned, but I don't know if it's going to really bring much more information to any of us.
Okay.
I think that's where I am, is that as we get closer to having an opening plan and what's needed at the schools, that's when I would like more information. I mean, once we have a plan, I mean, do we know, for instance, are the heating and air conditioning facilities, is the recirculation of air going to be adequate? Are there additional needs? Just as the plan becomes more formulated, I think that would be when more information would be helpful that we could discuss.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm just kind of curious the way you explain those munis reports. Is that something that would substitute for the reports we get now? Is it so similar and friendly that you should be looking at those?
It provides the same information. We just put it in a nice, neat little format for you. But in our capital budget, we do have a new reporting system we're putting in for Munis, and once that's in, you will only get Munis reports. It's always been my contention since I've been here. Some people have heard me say this many times, that anytime we manipulate the numbers, it's exactly what we're doing, manipulating the numbers. But if I give you a Munis spreadsheet right off of the Munis, then it's just easier for all of us. So that's what we're working towards, providing the data you're looking for in a report that we can print right from Munis without us having to download into an Excel spreadsheet. So that's yet to come.
No, it actually would even put in the form of a motion that maybe we get both reports and just consider if we could eliminate the extra work for you.
But you actually do. The backup to the spreadsheets is the Munis report. You get that as well.
Yeah. I just want to make it clear. I don't think there's any. I want to make it clear that it's not a what decisions you're making and a trust issue or anything like that. It is simply, as a Board of Finance, knowing that there's a lot of challenges the town and the Board of Ed are going through right now. Is it helpful to have another meeting to discuss those things? What I'm hearing is not right now. And I'm perfectly fine with that. As we get into September and the schools open, we get into October, we get into tax collections, we see how January, as time goes on, we can make that decision. I'm hearing not yet. Oh, and I'm perfectly fine with that. So I just wanted to see what the board's thoughts were and what the Board of Education and the town's thoughts were on it. That's really all it is. And I feel comfortable the way everything is going right now. The Board of Ed has a lot of work cut out for it. A lot of things have changed actually since our last Board of Finance meeting, including a mascot. So, I mean, you guys have been meeting literally, if not every week, I'm sure even more. So, and I don't want to add any more. I personally don't want to add anything more to either the town or the Board of Ed side. I just want to see if we could be helpful. So.
I can speak for Mary Jane. We're happy to go to as many meetings as you want us to go to. So.
You guys have to have a life too,
I am happy to attend any Zoom meeting from my dining room that you would like to have.
Come back to my office for any meeting. So, Mike, whatever you want.
Because the commute, as I said, is much better from here.
Yes.
My commute's not bad. It's like 1.1 miles, so.
Is there anything else for the Board of Education? Otherwise, I
Good
will-
luck. Good luck with everything.
With that, I'll entertain a motion to accept the reported expenditures of the Board of Education for the month of June 2020 in the amount of $9,820,758.86.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Any abstentions or recusals? Okay. Committee reports, we have the building permits. Anything on building permits?
Nope, not at this time. We're still working on a few items.
Okay. Item number 7, old business. We're all set with that. I had an item, but Matt, you have something under old business?
I do. Based on this morning's Board of Selectmen meeting, I think it's finally time to update the Board of Finance relative to a consent order that the Board of Selectmen authorized me to sign with DEEP relative to the 5 notices of violations that had occurred sometime prior to the middle of 2017. You guys have heard, we've talked about this on a couple of occasions. I've not been at liberty to disclose a significant amount of information relative to that consent order. Tonight, I am willing to disclose a little bit of information pending the DEEP's hearing that they will conduct, as is required by state law, regarding the settlement that we have agreed to. As you may recall, there were 5 notices of violations that were perpetrated by activities undertaken by the town of Guilford, particularly through the engineering department, that resulted in expansions on the permitted encroachments on wetlands. As you may have recalled from some executive sessions, there were some pretty significant numbers involved relative to fines, remediation, and those fines and remediation were from both the DEP and the Army Corps of Engineers. I know there have been some questions over the past 25, 27 months relative to some of the bills that we have paid for an environmental attorney, as well as some monies paid out to Malone and McBroom. What I'm happy to report is we have been able to negotiate a settlement with DEEP relative to the violations, and those are really the 5 violations we're concerned about. The Army Corps of Engineers basically just piles on top of that. The activity that occurred this morning was the Board of Selectmen authorized me to sign the consent order with DEP, which, if I can summarize for a moment, allows us to move forward with the work we had done on these 5 projects as they were built, with no remediation projects on them specifically. We have agreed, based on our recommendation, to a mitigation project in the for a tidal restoration project between the West River in Chittenden and the Guilford Yacht Club for a tidal restoration project, which could include cost up to $100,000 to $125,000. A supplementary environmental project is in lieu of a. It's a basically you committed a sin. You got to do something to make the shoreline great again. Of $15,000, and then a straight out fine to DEP of $20,000 for the sins we committed knowingly because we had submitted false affidavits relative to the work that we had done. What I want to point out to you is that we still have not settled with the Army Corps of Engineers, who also has jurisdiction on these types of activities. You may or may not recall an executive session that we had an environmental attorney who was recommending that we try to negotiate a collaborative agreement between DEP and the Army Corps of Engineers. After about 18 months, it was apparent to me that that result in only significantly extended litigation and legal fees. So I made the decision to pursue an agreement with DEP, owing to the relationships that some of our state legislative delegation have, but more importantly, the relationship that our town engineer and our consultant Malone and McBroom have with the operating level folks at DEP. It appears as if Army Corps of Engineers is going to accept the mitigation project we have, which, for those of you who may recall, would be in lieu of the in lieu fees that Army Corps is allowed to charge, which DEP is not allowed to charge for these types of violations. That would have resulted in about $290,000 worth of in lieu fees. I will add one other piece of information, that one of the permits that the town of Guilford signed on to relative to one of the road elevation projects included an agreement to the restoration of the Leeds Island Marsh. And that agreement was entered into, I will say this cautiously, inadvisedly, because the current cost to accomplish that, just to elevate one roadway, could be between $1 and $1.5 million. So we have successfully negotiated that out of the consent agreement, largely because DEP has acknowledged that they were not able to require us to do that as a result of one of the mitigation projects. So this is a long-standing issue, and I know I have not been able to be forthcoming with this board for 2.5 years, but now you have it. So we will pay for the sins of our fathers with the respective restoration project, a supplementary environmental project, and fine. But we will walk away, and we will also not be subject to some of the earlier conditions that DEP was looking for, which included on every project our engineering department did that came in contact with wetlands, waterlands, or watercourses, that we hire a third-party engineering firm to validate the work we were doing. So, sorry to dump all of this on you at once, but it's not all at once. It's 2.5 years in the making. And Jeff, I see you nodding your head. You've been looking for this information for a long time.
I was going to ask.
Jeff, come on. How many times?
I know. I think that under the circumstances, what you've described is a very productive outcome from the town's perspective. The fines are, nobody likes to write a check if they don't have to, but given the circumstances that took place and the potential liability that the town was exposed to, it's understandable that we've got to pay something for what was done. The upside of it is that the projects that you've described are only going to result in improved environmental conditions for all the citizens of the town. So the way I look at it is, it's unfortunate that what happened, but my recollection is that none of the actions that were taken by the people in the town were done out of any desire to do anything but improve the roadways and the facilities here. The problem was that they didn't ask the permission to go ahead and do what they were doing. And
Well-
so to end up with improved roadways and improved environmental areas throughout the town at the expense of paying some fines is about as good an outcome as we could have expected, considering what we're
It'd been a
looking
lot worse.
at.
Thank you, Jeff.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you. And again,
Well done.
I will apologize for my inability to answer very direct questions over the last couple of years about this, but as you can understand, this is a pretty sensitive negotiation that has been going on.
Well, we knew Mr. Beatty would ask every other month at least, so you'd have to tell us eventually.
And he never took offense at me at saying can't answer it.
Nope.
I understand completely.
I will, Tracy, I think you're probably still on the call. Can you share with the Board of Finance the draft consent order that I am prepared to sign? Although we did find a typo earlier this morning, but in substance and form, it will be the agreement that I sign.
That'd be great. Thank you.
When do we expect to hear back from the state? Or
Oh,
is
this is final negotiation. We are at agreement
okay.
that this is the document. The typo that we discovered this morning, I think it was actually Charlie Haverda on section section 5. They had compete instead of complete.
Okay.
That's the only correction we need to make.
Terrific.
Matt, this was some work at Lower Road, right? That got caught up in this?
Actually, Jonathan, there are 5 notices of violations there. It was not Lower Road. The first of which was Tuttle's Point Road between Marshall Avenue and White Top Lane. The second was Chaffin Fish Road between a couple of street numbers. The third was Old Quarry Road to Andrews Road. The fourth was Long Cove Creek, immediately north of Daniel Avenue Crossing. And the fifth was some work, unfortunately, that I think we did down at the marina.
Okay.
In some of those instances, we did not file a permit. In some, we exceeded the allowable encroachment on wetlands, and we failed to reapply to DEP. And in at least 2 occasions, those that certified the as-built did so erroneously because they did not reflect the work that was actually done.
This was mitigation, right? After a lot of hurricane damage?
No, this was part of Guilford's coastal resilience plan. Specific
Okay.
roads that we had targeted to elevate.
I remember that
There
now.
were just 2 other little things that I can only say it one way, that our
Yep.
engineering department thought they should do and did not get the required.
The Chapinch, were we raising the road? I'm trying to remember this now.
Chaffinch, absolutely.
Yeah.
Same with Old Quarry.
Seems like
Chaffinch,
it was all done in such good faith to try to just improve the circumstances, but we didn't follow the procedures, obviously.
oh yeah, that's you got to play by the rules once in a while, And by the way, DEP has not assigned us any additional penalties or mitigation projects as the result of us having encroached further into the wetlands for any of these 3 programs that we did. And I'm going to give a huge shout out here right now to town engineer Janice Plasiak and Megan Raymond, who is one of the consultants from Malone and McBroom, who we have been using for a while to work with DEP. It became apparent to me, and I have to make this disqualifying statement, because town council wanted to use the services of an environmental attorney by the name of Chris McCormick. You guys have seen some bills over the years from his firm, and it escapes me right now. About 18 months ago, I made the decision that the strategy he had espoused, which was to get a combined settlement between from DEP and the Army Corps of Engineers, was unrealistic. It was at that point that I suggested that Janice Plasiak and Megan Raymond, who both had substantial relationships with the operating level people at DEP, start to negotiate this on our behalf. They did so, and the express purpose was to cut a deal with DEP that would force the Army Corps of Engineers to come to the table because we had a deal with DEP. I am pleased to say we have it, and the Army Corps of Engineers is currently reviewing this mitigation plan, and we understand they're going to give us credit for this. They may require something else, but it will be in place of what the Army Corps had originally said to us, because they have the ability to do this where DEEP doesn't. They were going to impose $290,000 in lieu fees for our transgressions. But the reality is the work Janice and Megan Raymond did to get DEP to the table is substantial. I get off my soapbox now. Anybody has any questions, you're welcome.
I guess just one more question. We've got the controls in place to prevent it from happening again, right?
Yes, we have a town engineer that believes that the DEP regulations are to be abided by.
Okay.
Pretty simple,
Used to be.
meaning to follow the DEP regulations.
Yeah, because they're pretty much.
Not saying the regulations are simple, but following them should
Well,
be.
they're not simple, but you can pretty much figure out what they are.
Yeah.
Thank you for your indulgence on that.
Thank you for the update, Matt.
Thank you.
Anything else under old business? All right, new business. I have one item, and it's only because it was triggered, I think, by the pension committee. If you were reading those notes, and obviously we'll follow the lead of the Board of Selectmen, about in-person meetings again. I'm wondering if some of you read that in the pension committee, and there was supposed to be, Matt, I know there was possibly going to be some discussion about when in-person meetings might happen again. And this is just to see what the, what the idea is behind that is. I didn't think it would be anything that would happen anytime soon, but has there been any discussion about reconstituting those in the next couple of months, or is it just we are where we are until further notice?
Actually, Mike, you can have them now if you can accommodate the number of people that you expect to participate in those meetings. We are still subject to the limitations on gathering sizes, the indoor gathering sizes. However, you need to be able to, this is the delicate balance you have to walk. If you're going to exceed the number of people at any one of those meetings, anybody who wants to participate electronically still needs to be able to do so, all right? So you need to conduct your meeting and have it available via Zoom at the same time, which is not all that insurmountable. The rule of thumb that I used with the Board of Selectmen was if there was any member who was uncomfortable with attending an in-person meeting, that we would not hold in person. We continue to do Zoom meetings. I think the big date is either September 4th or September 6th, when the governor's executive order expires. However, I fully expect that he is probably going to extend that executive order. I also expect that he, although I thought that up until today, when he issued a directive today that now people can be fined if they don't observe the quarantine coming back from a state that has that's on the blacklist. So I'm suspecting the governor will more than likely, and again, this is one man's opinion, please. He will more than likely be extending that September 6th deadline. He's already moved past the phase 3 opening. And this the recent move today says that they're pretty serious about making sure that what's happening in other parts of the country does not happen here. So I would counsel that rather than any legislative body of this town lead the way out of this before the governor says it's okay, let's keep doing what we're doing. And that's what the Board of Selectmen is going to do. I will tell you, we're hoping to make this a little bit easier for all of us. We conducted the Board of Selectmen meeting this morning from the Board of Selectmen's conference room with new video conferencing equipment. So I didn't have to have a device in front of me to do it. That will be available for use for all Board of Selectmen meetings going forward. More importantly, it will allow us to eventually do live streaming of our meetings, a combination of live streaming and Zoom, so that we can incorporate the public. The funds for that equipment we anticipate will be reimbursed from the feds on both either the CARES Act or through FEMA. We have engaged HB Communications for that endeavor. They have already looked at the community center, and we anticipate deploying similar equipment in the community center so that you guys can also have the same capability there. The long and short of the answer is we're going to do these. The Board of Selectmen is going to do Zoom meetings until at least the first week in September when we determine what the governor is going to do. I don't think we need to break the ice unless you want to do it and you're confident that you won't have more people in the audience in person than you can accommodate. I would suspect that probably would happen, but it's your call, Mike.
I'm
So
confident.
Mike, I think I want to throw in my 2 cents and just say, obviously we shouldn't do it until we're allowed to. And then at that point, I think it should be optional for each person because everybody faces different risks if they want to attend in person or they want to attend virtually. But I do miss in-person meetings, but when it's safe, be the right time.
No, I agree, Jonathan. I was just going to say, I'm confident we probably won't even get close to the limit, but I'm not confident that with the diverse board that I see in front of me, that we would all feel the same way. And I think, as Matt said, if there's any one of us that does not feel comfortable, I think we should just keep things going.
I'd just like to throw in that I think we should meet at Veronica's house because it's 86 degrees outside and she went out to get a jacket.
She's got good AC.
Nice and chilly, yeah.
And I had to take my jacket off because the AC shuts down around 6 o'clock.
You've never seen me without a jacket at one of these meetings, but
Me either.
I'm holding on. It's just barely hanging on in here.
Mine
You all
shut
have
down.
long sleeves on. I didn't.
I'm at the office. Mine shut down at 7 o'clock, and I got the jacket on. I'm like, ugh, I don't here. But anyway, regarding the meetings, we will keep them as Zoom meetings. I think it's been going fine. I just wanted to see what the what the general consensus was. I think that we all probably feel that as much as we'd want to see each other, in a physical setting, I think this will, with all the different risks, it's not worth it. So, anybody feel differently?
Nope.
All right. So that means, Tracy, you got to schedule another Zoom meeting next month. So, all good.
He is the queen of Zoom.
Yes. Anything else under new business?
Actually, Mike, just let me bring up one thing. We are, as we go into this new technological world of conducting meetings, there will be possibly a challenge with GCTV. Because as you know, Mike Graziano typically films most of your meetings.
Mm-hmm.
The equipment we have here has the ability to automatically record and live stream these meetings, which possibly, and this is we're working closely with GCTV. We don't want to cut them out of this. We want to make sure that they're an integral player in being able to provide content to the community. But there will be some discussions about how we actually film and broadcast the town meetings going forward. So,
Okay. Looking forward to that.
I mean, you can just take these recordings and upload them to YouTube.
bingo.
Yeah.
But the issue is we don't want to cut GCTV out of the process, owing to the role they play in our community. However, there's always a cost component to whatever we do, right? And if we provide the recordings to GCTV, so they are the ones that
Yeah, they
upload.
have their own YouTube channel.
And they put it on YouTube. I think that's the way I'm thinking that I want to do this, is to make them an integral part. Not the least of which is, as a board, you folks as well as the Board of Selectmen, we approved the $7,500 capital expenditure back in March originally. That, hard to say, called for another cart with technology, the 1990s technology on it. The conversation I've had with Shannon is we're gonna honor that capital contribution, but they're gonna look to redeploy that money, so it's not gonna be another 1990s technology cart that they're gonna invest in.
Good idea. That makes sense. Great. All right. Anything further? Public forum? We're it.
Move
Thank you.
adjourn.
There it is.
Second.
Thank you, everyone. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Good night, everyone.
Stay
Good night,
cool.
everybody.
Hey,